Hey guys, good morning. Coach Tags here for what feels like week 46 of quarantine. As you can see today, I'm repping a little bit different gear. Right, I got my Raven stuff on. Coach Crash gave my guys a shout out in his last lesson, and so I feel what better day than any. It's draft weekend. This last weekend, actually had some live sports to watch and enjoy. So I thought this would be the day to break out the Raven stuff. Okay. More importantly, right, today's lesson. So let's talk a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about John Brown. Okay, John Brown and what he meant to the mid 1850s. What he kind of brings to the table as far as leading into the Civil War and the slavery movement throughout it. So you see a couple of pictures of him, back in his prime, and then now a statue memorial of him and the things that he's done. So John Brown growing up, very religious. He comes from a very religious family and was raised to hate slavery. Okay, so his parents felt the same way, abolitionists, and he kind of fell into suit with that. He believed that slavery was wrong. It was against everything that should be believed in. And it was kind of his goal to kind of change that throughout his life. So in this picture, you see a picture, it looks like just bricks now, but that was his original tannery, a tannery being where you take like leathers and hides and you're using them as far as a business standpoint is concerned. So originally, he kind of settles in Pennsylvania with his wife, their kids. He has his business. But more importantly, in this movement, he was using this business also as part of the Underground Railroad. Underground Railroad is of those helping those imprisoned in slavery to get out of that situation. And they kind of use that as a path, a literal path, to guide them throughout it, to keep them hidden to where they can get to a free life. So this original tannery he had was said to help approximately 2,500 slaves kind of escape and become free throughout life. John, he had multiple wives and a total of 20 children. So he had a ton of kids. But in this time, most didn't make it to adulthood. He lost one with his first wife at birth. He lost both his wife and his child. He lost multiple kids to dysentery as they moved throughout the country. He tried to set up shop in Ohio and throughout different parts with his tannery business and some other trades. But overall, he really wanted to start a major slave rebellion. He told others that God selected him, God chose him to start this major slave rebellion, and that was his goal. Throughout a lot of this, as things escalate through the 1800s, mid 1800s. Coach Crouch talked a little bit about the Fugitive Slavery Act of 1850, to where if you were a slave that was caught, that had left, living as a free person, you could be sent back to the owners at that time, right? But it also meant that any free person that was born free, had lived in the country, if they were chosen, if they said, "Hey, we know you're a slave," they could sell you down to the South. So it's kind of like if you think back to the Salem witch trials, right? If you were said to be a witch, then you were a witch. That kind of concept. Now it was you're a slave and you're sold to the South. So some really hard, trying times. And so John, throughout all this, he starts a militant group to kind of help slaves. Okay, so kind of leads us to 1854, the Kansas-Nebraska Act. Remember, it's popular sovereignty, to where it basically allows people living in the territories to choose whether they want to be a free state or they want to be a slave state. So as America as we're starting to migrate west, that's kind of where this is trending. Okay, so we get to Kansas, Nebraska, those two new territories, popular sovereignty comes into effect, which is important because it prompts a lot of supporters from both pro-slavery and anti-slavery to move to Kansas to try to have their point of view be what happens throughout that state. So you had people from both parties essentially moving to this central location of America to try to change the way things were headed. Okay, so John's sons moved to Kansas. He ends up joining him with other family members. And eventually, throughout the end of this, okay, right before the Civil War starts and it prompts, Kansas joins the Union and they actually become a free state. So some say that the way things worked out were beneficial in in his nature, because that was his goal as an abolitionist, is to get rid of slavery and for every state to be a free state. So during this time, you got the Potawatomi massacre that happens in May 24th. So leading up to this, you've got congressmen and senators fighting in Washington, D.C. You've got a ton of stuff going on in Kansas with, our pro-slavery settlers and some of the things they're doing. And eventually comes to a head. Brown, his sons, and a group of abolitionists on May 24th at night actually went to some of the pro-slavery settlers' homes, drugged them from their homes, drug them down to the Potawatomi Creek, and they actually murdered all 5 people. Okay, that was kind of their point of saying, we're not going to take it. We're going to go to the extreme for you to hear our point of view and for the state to be free. So, different way of looking at things, but he wasn't afraid. He wasn't afraid to kill someone to get his point across. So Brown and his sons eventually go into hiding, and this is when most Americans start referring to Kansas as Bleeding Kansas, okay, because of the death and the murder and the bloodshed that's going on over this view of slavery. So, as they say, as much as a couple hundred people were murdered during the time of Bleeding Kansas over the years, and again, ultimately, Kansas is going to become a free state. This picture here is a really interesting picture because it depicts so much of what's going on. So this was depicted a little bit later on as far as his views and how things shook down. The gentleman in the middle with his arms spread wide is John Brown himself. You see him as he stands there. It looks as if he's holding like the Bible and a rifle, showing both his religious side and potentially his violent side for his rights. The 2 men laying in front are supposed to be shown as a Union Confederate soldier during the Civil War and represent all the bloodshed over slavery. You've got the Southerners on the right. You've got some slaves in the photo, the Confederate flag. You've got members of maybe the Union, okay, and what they're standing for and trying to make things right. You see those trying to settle west in the background. You've got the fires and you've got the tornado of kind of depiction of the disaster of things to come because of this issue. So all that leads to 1856 to 1859. During this time, John and some of his sons and those that follow him, they kind of travel throughout the country a little bit, and they try to get others to kind of get behind their movement, right? We're going to stop slavery. Here's how we're going to do it. Are you with us? So his big overall goal, he wanted to raid Harper's Ferry, Virginia in 1859. That was the location of the largest armory in the South, okay? Held tons and tons of weapons and ammunition. It says over 20,000 rifles, muskets, pistols. In today's currency, it'd be worth about $7 million or more. So a ton of weapons and ammo needed to start what he wanted was the Southern slaves to start a slave rebellion. So his goal was to get into Harper's Ferry Armory, take all as much weapons and ammo as they could, and provide it to Southern slaves. At that point, they could start fighting back for their rights, and therefore the rebellion sets in. So step one was to break into the armory. Step 2 was he needed slaves and others to help him get those weapons out, because he shows up with 20 dudes, about 21. And so with that, that's not enough to carry out all the ammunition they need. So they break in. That's a success. It was pretty easy. Not many people were there guarding the place, as big as it was and as important as it was. They break in. The downfall is nobody else showed up to help them get this stuff out. Okay? So it kind of just turned into a suicide mission. When people found out, word gets around, they get trapped in this armory. The U.S. Marines, they come, they storm the armory or the arsenal under the command of Robert E. Lee. Robert E. Lee, most of you probably heard of. You'll get to hear more about him as we work into the Civil War. But they come, they break in, and they take back control. If you weren't killed, if you were part of John Brown's crew, if you weren't killed during the raid, what happened is you were arrested. In this case, John Brown, he was arrested and sentenced to death. Okay, so he's injured during the raid. He gets stabbed in the chest, but he goes to jail for a few weeks during his trial. He's convicted of treason, and on December 2nd, 1859, he was hanged in public, okay, along with a few others from the raid. Again, another photo just showing a few little similarities, some of the stuff in the background, what things could have looked like. You see John Brown in the middle with his injured wound as things kind of come to an end in Harper's Ferry. So all in all, there's questions that surround his antics, who he was and how he did it. And a question here was John Brown a hero or was he a terrorist? And so it's kind of a touchy subject, right? So the North at the time, to some people, not all, but those anti-slaveries, they believed in what he was doing. Maybe not the way he did it, but he can be considered a hero in the way of starting that movement to get rid of slavery. And the South at the time considered a terrorist because of the way he does it, right? He's costing Southerners with slaves lots of money, and they don't like it, especially when it comes to the violence and whatnot. And then you've got some that kind of teeter on that line of, could he be both? Because he did a ton of great things in moving to get rid of slavery. Okay, so he takes that route, a lot of tremendous stuff. But in today's terms, would he be considered a terrorist? In some eyes, he would be. Okay, so it's something to think about. It's something to kind of chew on a little bit. Overall, I hope you enjoyed the lesson. I hope you got something out of it. As you move forward, do a couple of things that are most important. Take care of yourself. Take care of your family during this time. And as always, if you need anything, don't hesitate to reach out to myself or the other coaches. We want to be there for you. All right. Have a great week. Look forward to seeing you soon. See ya.